All right, let's talk about China. Because of the three countries where we had this Trump tariff put in place, China is the one that retaliated in a big way. We're going to find out how big in a moment. They announced effective tariffs on February 10th, so upcoming 15% on U.S. coal, liquefied natural gas, 10% on crude oil, large displacement vehicles, agricultural machinery. So where Canada and Mexico at least bent the knee to President Trump, it looks like China said, no, we're going to put in place our own tariffs. Well, the CTO of Palantir says we are already at a war with China. Of course, Palantir is an offshoot of the CIA and DARPA, so Palantir would love nothing more than a war with China. Listen.
But I think the real lesson, the more profound one, is that we are at war with China. We are in an AI arms race. And I got into a disagreement with Sam Altman about this at the Senate AI Summit over a year ago, where I was arguing that we are in an AI arms race, and there's an opposing view that we can all get along and we can cooperate on these things. And I'm sure the other side feels quite different, realizing that their IP has been stolen in this process here. But this war started long ago. It was an economic war with the ascension of China to the World Trade Organization, the greatest IP theft in history, the greatest wealth transfer in history. It is an opium war. The number one cause of deaths of 18 to 45-year-olds in this country is fentanyl. That is coming from China. It is a diplomatic war. The Belt and Road Initiative is basically indentured servitude for other countries to the CCP here.
So we are already at war with China. Eric Eggers is an investigative journalist, vice president of research at the Government Accountability Institute, co-host of the Drill Down podcast with Peter Schweizer. And we invited Eric on to talk about the retaliation from China. Eric, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. I was going to go to the protests over the shutdown of USAID, which I agree with you. It's ironic that people would call for action that way. But it's always good to also talk about the other war that we're fighting, which is the one with China.
Yes.
So break it down for us, I guess. Are you worried about a trade war with China, or was this always coming? Of course, most of us know that China floods our market with cheap goods. It's not good for us, but do we want to do it the easy way, or do we want to do it the hard way?
Well, I think if nothing else, a good thing to come out of this conversation is at least we can be honest about what China's posture and perspective is towards the United States of America. As we've reported consistently with Peter Schweizer on our Drill Down podcast here at the Government Accountability Institute, China has been at war with us for some time. They use everything from their access to our youth via the TikTok app. They use everything to access to the physical beings of people with fentanyl, which floods our country, and China has refused to do anything about, despite Xi Jinping's promises to Donald Trump back in 2017 to the contrary. And even now, they are leveraging, I just learned this today, our anchor baby policy, and they're bringing Chinese nationals here, having children here, and then returning back to the homeland. So, I mean, and remember, China thinks in terms of dynasties, not days, months, or even years. So China has been playing the long game, waging war against us. And I think it's actually in an interesting contrast to the way that Donald Trump appears to be governing right now. You talked about all the things that are happening with Donald Trump. I think these are quick things. Look at the tariff on Mexico. Look at the tariff on Canada. It's about winning the news cycle, getting a concession, and then kind of going back to some sort of stabilizing force with the win. That's not how China operates, and I think that's what you're seeing in their response to us.
So our military would love for us to go to war with China. That's not going to happen. And the United States would clearly lose a war with China. Traveling thousands of miles, we would be decimated by that. So economically seems to be the war we're playing here. How much, though, are Americans going to feel the pain of these sort of retaliatory tariffs from the Chinese side? What do you think?
Well, that remains to be seen, and it remains to be seen how much tolerance the Trump administration will have for heightened prices, and ultimately how much tolerance they'll have for the American people's tolerance for heightened prices. As you noted, Chinese goods are already discounted. You're correct. We're not going to have an actual land war, but I do believe that we need to be honest about the fact that China has been an antagonistic threat. They've been stealing our intellectual property. They've been negatively impacting our physical well-being and our mental well-being. And this is something China's been honest about for some time. So an economic war would just be the latest effort on their part to weaken the United States. Remember, there's a reason why they cultivated the relationship they did with the Biden family. $31 million made their way to the Bidens at least from sources directly linked to the Chinese espionage apparatus of the Communist Party. So this is something that, they had a much better relationship with the previous regime than they do with this one. So I think, unfortunately, because the Trump administration is not as nice to China as the Biden administration was for a number of reasons, partly because China wasn't as good to the Trump administration's personal economy, then we will see some negative impact. But at the end of the day, China wants to impact the United States market as much as the United States wants impact or wants access to the Chinese market. So even the perception of an AI arms race, we spoke about this on our podcast recently, is something that a lot of people that are close to Trump, people like Mark Zuckerberg, people like Sam Altman, people that want to be invested in by the U.S. government to try to help cultivate the competitor and ultimate victor over DeepSeek and things like that. They want the idea of competition. So there's a lot of incentives to see China as a threat so that we might invest in the U.S. alternative.
But what could a good deal look like between Trump and Xi Jinping? Because obviously we maybe don't want troops on our border, Chinese troops on our border, obviously, but what do we want from them? And I was kind of going through this fantasy recently. What if Chinese troops actually did help us fight the cartels and then there wasn't a drug? Now, I'm anti-war 100%, but who could actually fight the drug cartels that run through Mexico and South America? So can we just be utopic for a second?
Would we want 10,000 Chinese troops on our border?
I don't think we want that, right? But is there this world where there would be some type of acceptable force that would take out all of these bad guys and make it so? I don't know. Again, we're being utopic here, but let's talk about it anyway.
So I think actually what we would love for China to do is the opposite of put troops on the border. It's take away the Chinese resources that are contributing to the drug trade now. So we know that China could handle and address the precursor that's manufactured in their country in a much more serious way than they are doing. China has refused to do so, or at least declined to do so. That's one thing they could do. They could stop the fentanyl from entering our country via the source where it's manufactured in China. Number two, the drugs make their way into the country via Chinese apparatus the entire way. It's laundered through Chinese banks. Research that we've done here has demonstrated that the cartels actually use Chinese technology in order to get the drugs across, like in telecommunication devices, to get them across the border. And there's even Chinese language centers at the key areas where the drugs make their way into Mexico and then ultimately across the border. So this is a Chinese operation from source to ultimately the American consumer, where, as you just played the clip earlier, it is the leading cause of death for Americans from the age of 18 to 45. So we don't need China to put troops on the ground. We need China to take this threat much more seriously. And I'll tell you, this is why I think ultimately this is what the Trump administration wants. It was overlooked, but 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump nominated a guy named Derek Maltz to be the acting director of the Drug Enforcement Agency. And he has been someone who has singularly focused on the threat of fentanyl and the threat of other drugs from China, synthetic drugs, and the impact they're having on America's youth. It is a devastating one. It is the leading cause of death. And so that is ultimately what I think the Trump administration wants China to do. We don't need troops on the ground. We need them to take the threat seriously. We need them to get the money out of their banks, and we need to get the precursor off the streets.
Eric, I'll get you out of here on this. Would drug lords find a way around this if Mexico secures its border, Canada secures its border, and China says we're going to stop the flow of fentanyl into your country? Would there be some sort of an apparatus that we haven't thought of where we would still have this scourge in the United States?
I hate to say the answer is yes, but unfortunately I think it is. It's the basic law of supply and demand, and also economics. The reality is that as long as there is a demand in the United States for illegal drugs, the supply will find it. And you hear lots of stories about even people within the Trump administration who present as a force for good in the war against the drug cartels. And then you find out they're actually on the take from drug cartels and implicit in this trade. And it's just because, listen, whatever money they're making, the drug cartel gets access and leverage to them and says, listen, you're going to do what we want you to do, and we're going to give you a lot of money to do it, or we're going to kill your family. That's a very challenging thing, but that's the negotiating tactics that the cartels play. So as many people think that Trump plays hardball, I think, unfortunately, it pales in comparison to the cartels.
I said I was going to get you out of here a second ago, but what do you think this phone call is going to entail? Trump, Xi Jinping. What do you think will come of it? Any broad movement, any big movement?
Hey, that's okay. I think it will entail a lot of conversation about fentanyl. And I think at the end of the day, China wants to be a good partner with the United States. They want access to our market, at least on some level. And so I think that they should be mutually incentivized to find something to do, even if it's just getting Xi Jinping to do the thing he said he would do 8 years ago. I think that's the key. So I think fentanyl will be a big part of it. And I think, look, the tariffs, Donald Trump's correct, and Elon Musk has talked about this. We have, I think, a 2.5% tariff on Chinese goods. China has a 25% on some of our goods, and Elon Musk has complained about it. So there's a lot to talk about, but I think fentanyl will be central to the conversation.
Another thing on the phone, be like, by the way, how much money did you guys send to Biden? Really like to know. Just
it's
tell
okay
me.
now.
Just tell me.
Hey, he already asked. That's the question he asked the Ukrainian officials, right? You know Trump wants to
Got him
know.
impeached.
Yeah.
So he's not above asking.
Exactly.
Exactly. You know that's going to come up on the call. That's Eric Eggers. Thank you so much for joining us. You can check out Eric's podcast along with Peter Schweizer, the Drill Down podcast. Thanks for coming on the show and really fascinating insight. Thanks, Eric.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you, guys.